Okay, you can go ahead, Sean.
Good afternoon and welcome to StockTalk. My name is Sean Cowbytes and I will be your host. Manitoba Agriculture is offering a series of livestock and forage webinars to help Manitoba beef producers in the management of their cattle operations. These webinars will run monthly until April. We're glad you can join us for today's presentations, which will be recorded so you can view them at a future date, or if you can't make the 1 o'clock start. This year, we are continuing with our StockTalk online webinars, and we will be holding in-person extension events. That means provincial events like Manitoba Beef and Forage Days will take place in January, and a new event is the Manitoba Beef and Forage Conference next week in Brandon on December 12th and 13th at the Victoria Inn. We have speakers from across Western Canada offering a variety of interesting presentations. So some of them include smart beef cows on smart farms, reducing methane emissions in beef cattle production, findings from the Canadian Cow-Calf Surveillance Network, farm transition or succession, a trade show with a number of different agribusinesses in attendance. Other topics include pasture rejuvenation, implants, troubleshooting calving, malpresentations, intercropping forages, beef nutrition, and more. Registration cost is $225 a person. And for more details or to register, go to mbfi.ca/conference or contact any of your Manitoba Agriculture offices. Beef and Forage Days will be held January 9th to the 11th in Pipestone, Austin, and Ericsdale. On January 9th, we are in Pipestone with an afternoon meeting from 1 to 4:30. On Wednesday, January 10th, we are in Austin with a full day event. And then Thursday, January 11th is in Ericsdale from 9:30 to 2:30. And topics will cover forages, cattle marketing, beef nutrition, Ask the Vet, and more. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, feel free to submit them by typing them in on your computer or smartphone. This year, feed supplies are decent, but some areas were affected by dry conditions, creating some feed shortages, meaning producers may have to look at alternatives. Producers still need to properly balance their rations to meet their livestock requirements. So we have topics today to help you do that. And so far, we have had an easier start to our winter feeding period with the mild weather and lack of snow. So to start off our presentations, the first one, we'll look at developing feeding strategies using the Cowbytes ration balancing program. And we have Juanita Kopp, a livestock specialist with Manitoba Agriculture in Beausejour. So welcome, Juanita.
Great, thanks, Sean. I'll just pull up my presentation. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back on StockTalk. And I'm just gonna maybe shut off my camera just to get started. So the topic I'm going to talk about is developing feeding strategies using Cowbytes. It's been a little while since Cowbytes has been available, so we thought we'd just go over some of the use of Cowbytes. And it is a ration balancing software. It will help beef cattle producers formulate their own feed rations. You can put in a variety of combinations of feeds, pretty much anything, a beef animal could eat, byproducts and other supplements to meet those animal production targets. So Cowbytes is now currently available from the Beef Cattle Research Council at beefresearch.ca. It does cost $60, and that covers the cost of shipping and the taxes. It is delivered on a USB flash drive through regular mail. The current version 5.4 does not contain any significant upgrades since it was last upgraded in 2012. It was developed originally by Alberta Agriculture, and now it is available through BCRC. All of the proceeds from the sale of the Cowbytes will be going to future upgrades. So if you order it online, it will take about 2 weeks to get. So I'm just going to start for why we would want to do some ration balancing and using. Each year, the Manitoba Agriculture Farm Management Team puts together the beef cow-calf production cost guidelines, and there are two scenarios that they put forward. There's a 300 cow herd corn silage, and then there's a 150 cow herd hay ration. And it goes through all of the costs of production And so what I've taken from that is the 150 cow herd, the hay ration one, 32% of those total cost per cow is from feed. So winter feed is a significant cost for that production system, and having a balanced ration will help to minimize that cost per head per day is an important step in risk management planning. So if we can look at using and doing rations throughout that production cycle, we can, help manage risk and manage costs. So when we're preparing to do rations, first we want to make sure we feed test the feeds that you will be feeding. Take an inventory of all those feeds that you have on hand, and this will help determine if you have enough feed for each feeding period throughout the winter and fall and spring. And rations will then help identify where you need to supplement those animals to meet your production goals. So the goals of ration balancing is to meet that nutrition requirements for the beef cow during the critical phases of her production cycle. You want to satisfy the nutrient requirements, say, of weaned calves, or promote growth and development, either for the breeding replacements or fattening and slaughter. So looking at the cows, the calves, any development of your breeding heifers, and then for maybe backgrounders or finishers. So you want to be able to utilize those nutrients efficiently and to deliver those nutrients at a cost-effective manner. So here's a shot of the Cowbytes screen. And really what you'll see when it opens up is you have a number of menus on the top and menus here. So this is where we put in, like I said, the different types of feeding. So cows, lactating, feeding replacements, bred heifers, cows, dry cows, and then herd bulls. So each of those, you would then put in information into the program, body weight, breed, ionophores, what you're feeding, what your desired gain would be, this scenario, months pregnant, expected birth weight, current month of lactation, lactation number. All of these are important for the program to then give you what the animals require. And it's also important because in Manitoba, obviously, we have differences in temperatures throughout the months, putting the temperature, wind speed, hair depth, all of these items will affect the maintenance or nutrient requirements of the animal. And this is another screenshot that I took of Cowbytes also provides a feed table that you can enter your own feeds into, or this is the standard feed table that comes with the program, which is an average of Alberta feeds. But you can, like I said, get your feeds tested and then you can customize your feed table for your feeding scenarios. So a few things to be aware of when you're using Cowbytes. So when you're doing your rations, make sure you don't underestimate your cow weights or overestimate your bale weights. And so, bale weights and feed weights, if you're using round bales, do your round bales weigh 1,000 pounds if it's maybe a straw, or 1,500 pounds plus if it's a hay, maybe 1,800 pounds if it's like a round bale silage or even higher. But it depends on the forage type, the moisture of the bale or type, etc. So it's important to get a handle on your bale weights. And what does your average cow weight? Is it 1,200 pounds? Is it 1,350 pounds? The cost of production guides that I showed you earlier, they base it on a 1,350 weight cow as an average weight. So of course, cow weight's going to depend on the breed, the age, and condition of the cows. So that's important to start off with Cowbytes having an average of your cow herd, or if it's going to be heifers and steers, scale is definitely helpful. Cowbytes does not automatically add a feed waste amount. So if we're looking at inventories, we definitely should take into account the feed wastage that occurs through winter feeding. If we look at forages, they tend to be about a 15 to 20% waste factor. And for concentrate feeds, pellets, or grain, it's 5 to 10% waste. So within Cowbytes, you can set those when you're looking at your overall feeding strategies. Another thing to keep in mind, if you're using Cowbytes, it doesn't cows will, if you're bedding with straw, sorry, they will consume some of that straw if it's palatable. And so that free choice intake is about 5 to 6 pounds per day. One of the things we want to check too is some of the ratios, which is on the bottom that I showed you of that Cowbytes screenshot, checking some of the ratios there, and one of them specifically is a tetany ratio, especially if we're looking at straw grain-based rations. They have high potassium levels, and so we need to balance that with magnesium and calcium to make sure that we don't get a tetany scenario. If we're looking at, adding those minerals and salt, that's usually 2 to 3 ounces per day. And of course, all of these will depend on, and any feedstuffs you're putting in will depend on the content of each of the nutrients. So in the mineral case, you may have to add or subtract depending on the concentration in the supplements. One of the other ratios we look at is DIP to TDN percent. Should not be below 8. Really what that's showing is keeping the rumen microorganisms happy, so that nitrogen and energy balance within the rumen to keep things flowing through. So, as you get more familiar with Cowbytes, these ratios will make more sense to you, and they also just help the overall health and move it through the digestive tract. One of the other options in Cowbytes is the other column. You can actually track concentrations within the ration. Perhaps you've had a mold test done, and you want to see how much is the percentage in the ration. You can add that into Cowbytes to keep track of it. Any additives you're putting in, say rumensin, and maybe you've had your nitrates tested in your feed and your water, that can also be tracked through the program. And saving the Cowbytes rations, my recommendations, of course, is to save each as an individual file, but you also can save that customized feed table once you put your feed tests in, and then you can use it for multiple different rations. So for each feeding group, you might want to do a different file. So I save mine into the different animal groups. So bred heifers, mid-gestation cows, late gestation cows, etc. So lactating, the bulls, backgrounders, feeders, all have an individual file that you can save. And so you can get as detailed as you want with Cowbytes. It's one of the things, once you have it and you're using it, you can go by monthly or weekly. I mean, sky's the limit once you get used to it, working with it. This is just the data that I have from Brandon. It's 92-year average data. And if you want to do month to month, I usually do 3 months at a time or a month, depending on what the production goals are. But that can be used, or you can just do -15 for the current and previous month, and then get rations for like when the peak amount of nutrients would be required for each of the feeding periods. So there's a number of ways that we can use Cowbytes and look at the varying requirements as temperatures go up and down. So when we're making a ration and looking where to start, the first thing I start to balance when I've got all my feedstuffs in, got first my animal types entered in, all of that information. Then I go in and I start to balance for energy. Once I have energy balance for the amount of gain or maintenance that I'm working on, then I go look at the protein levels, and then the macro minerals, calcium and phosphorus being the main ones, and then trace minerals, so copper, selenium. Vitamins A and E would be then the last second last step, and then I check the ratios. And one nice thing about Cowbytes is it has kind of like the stoplight. So if it's green, it's good. If it's amber, it's cautionary. You want to check on that. And if it's red, then we definitely have to take a look at how to improve that ration. Those are kind of energy, protein, then the minerals, vitamins, and then the ratios. So there's a number of other information items that you could include. You can enter the current cost of each of your feed ingredients, and then Cowbytes will automatically calculate the cost per head per day, and you can look at also the total feed costs over the specified feeding period. There are 8 different reports that Cowbytes can generate. So again, this is just a screenshot of it. So there's a quick report, a ration report, a a ration manure report, feeds available. So if you have all your feeds that you entered in, you can just print out that. If you do a ration for your cows, just print out the feedstuffs that you use in that specific ration. There's a ration summary report of all of the rations you put in. There's also a function within Cowbytes if you want to, you have a TMR feed wagon, you can actually calculate based on your rations some batch scale sheets that will help you mix your feeds in. And then a water report. So if you have your water tested, you can also put that in, and then it will generate a water report as well. So here's just a screenshot I took this morning of one of the, this is the ration report, and just to show you what it looks like. So it has the animal description of what I put in the animal type, half a pound of gain, and then all of those weather conditions. And then what I put, this is just a grass, hay, corn ration. And so it just shows you, these are the rations that are the ratios that I look at. Calcium, phosphorus, you know, the other ones is NDF as a body weight. This one will show me if it's above 1.2, may not be able to consume it all. Just to give you an idea of what one of the ration reports looks like. It is 2 pages. The second page of the ration report shows you all of the nutrients, all the nutrients that Cowbytes looks at, and it will give you what you supplied in your ration and then what was recommended by Cowbytes, and it will star those that don't quite meet the recommendation. So it's just a good overall review of the ration that you put together. So once you use Cowbytes, you know, it's not something we use every day, of course. It's usually just before we get into the winter feeding period or any of the other feeding periods you might get into. We don't use it as often, so we are available to help. The Manitoba Livestock Specialists can review your Cowbytes rations. So if you put something together and you want another pair of eyes to go over it, or just to look to see you know, if they're actually going to eat the ration you've put together or any red flags, you can email your file to us. We will review it, just making sure that it's, you send us, so if my mid-gestation cow ration, I want you to review it, send it in this CML and attach it to an email. The other way we can help, we have put on a number of Cowbyte workshops just recently, but if there is, you know, more people want them, or we certainly can be approached to do workshops, but you definitely can contact the Manitoba Livestock Specialists to have your rations reviewed and for help program. So overall, just sort of a review. So any kind of prep for winter feeding or feeding adjustments, take an inventory of your feeds on hand, analyze those feeds, determine the needs of that you may for supplements, minerals, and vitamins based on those rations that you've generated. Body condition scores of your cows can help to sort into feeding groups, which I didn't really mention, but it's one of those steps for different feeding groups. Formulate those rations to meet the requirements. Apply that feeding program, and then monitor the condition of the cows or other performance measurements, say weight gains. And then adjust for those changes in weather and performance. And you can then, of course, want to adjust for the stage of gestation, and then to lactation, and all those different periods within the cow's cycle. And for the growing cattle and for bulls, I mean, you can do all sorts of different adjustments to the rations if you're not seeing the performance you want as well. And last but not least, and sometimes we tend to overlook water, but during the winter months, mature cows will consume 10 to 15 gallons per day, and it's very important to look at this. So having a water analysis done will help you determine potential other issues maybe with the ration. We want to look at the level of dissolved minerals. If you have a high level of dissolved minerals, it can decrease weight gain and cause scouring. Minerals in the water are additive to minerals in feed. So too, if we're feeding feeds that are of a higher nitrate level, maybe say a green feed, the nitrate levels in the water are additive to the nitrate levels in that green feed or other feeds. So we want to be able to monitor that. And then sulfates also tend to be high in some waters within the province. So you can impair copper absorption and cause some copper deficiencies, which can then lead to some other thiamine deficiency and may cause polio. So water is important to have a test done, and we can then put it into Cowbytes to see how it affects your ration. And I just added this because I recommend this as a very good reference book. It's the Livestock Water Quality, a field guide for cattle, horses, poultry, and swine. It was authored by a Dr. Okowski at the University of Saskatchewan. So I do recommend it if you have water questions. It is online, and you can just Google that, and it will pop up as a PDF. So cattle will only balance 4 things: the air they breathe, the water they drink, the dry matter intake that they can actually consume, and salt. So it's up to us to supply a properly balanced winter ration, and Cowbytes is the program that can help you. Thank you. And if there's any questions, I've left a little time for it. And then just to give you a slide of, these are our staff folks that can help with Cowbytes.
Thanks, Juanita. So yeah, the livestock specialists across the province can help you with your feed testing and ration balancing needs. If you don't have the Cowbytes program yourself, Cowbytes is available through the BCRC's website for a nominal fee. And even if you do have it and you want to get someone else to review it or just to help you out with it, any of us can help you with that. So Pam, not sure if you had any questions for Juanita, and if not, if the participants think of something a little bit later on in one of the other presentations, you can just type in your question, and then we can come back to it a little bit later.
Yeah, just one question with regards to the degradable intake protein, or the DIP, and the UIP, Juanita. Just how important is that to have it balanced when you're trying to balance all of those numbers at the bottom of the screen in Cowbytes?
DIP and UIP are important, especially if we're looking at using a straw grain ration. DIP is the degradable intake protein, UIP is undegradable. The degradable intake protein just helps move things along. So if that number is really low and you get cold weather, you can have issues with impaction. So it is important. If you're with 100 grams or like 50 grams out, it will depend. And then that's why, you can send it to us to review. If it's way off, you can have some issues with things moving through the animal properly. If your DIP is too high, that's usually not a big issue, but it's when it's low that we can have some issues there. So it's important, and if you're concerned about it, get us to review it. But we just want to make sure that things are moving through. And the DIP actually feeds the rumen microflora, or the bugs in their rumen. So you want to keep them happy to keep things moving properly through the animal.
Perfect. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Juanita. We'll move on to our next presentation on alternative feeding strategies. We have Melissa Atchison, who is with the Manitoba beef producer as an extension and research specialist. So she's filling in for Bree Keln, who was unable to make it with us. Both of them co-presented this presentation in the summer at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference. So I'd like to welcome Melissa.
Hi, everybody. Can you just let me know you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you good.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me, everybody. As Sean said, I'm Melissa Atchison with Manitoba Beef Producers. I'm the research and extension specialist. We also run a commercial cow calf operation and a backgrounding lot near Pipestone, Manitoba. We raise, calve out between 800 and 900 cows every spring, and have a feed lot where we background those calves, and we're going to buy some calves in here and feed some more this winter. So just going to let you know some of the different management strategies that we use and have used on our farm, and that I've heard used elsewhere, and good ways to, lower your cost of production and maintain and enhance the landscape and herd health. with your winter feeding strategy. So excuse me, the goals of this presentation are certainly, with extensive feeding, why are we doing it? What are we doing? How are we doing it? Where should we do it? Practical applications for winter feeding, absolutely. And identifying opportunities on your own operation. You may be limited due to water bodies, topography, soil type, the time of year you may be calving. And so this isn't about, me telling you to do the way I do it. It's just about identifying opportunities within your own operation. So why would we choose extensive winter feeding? So winter feed costs, as Juanita said, represent a really, really high proportion of your overall cost of keeping a cow for a year, right? So feed and bedding account for 40% of your cost of production in general. And it's important to know that cost of feed is a function of your yield, your quality, and how you feed it. So I'm going to go over that again and again today. And you can be a high or a low cost feeder, regardless of the method that you're using. So whether you're just feeding hay or feeding silage, you can be a high or low cost operator, regardless of the feed type. It's kind of more about the management and how you feed that feed. And I quickly just want to double up on using feed nutrients strategically to help benefit forage production. So yes, this is a winter feeding strategies presentation, but I'll touch a little bit on on summer and growing conditions and things like that. So your cost of production is not necessarily dependent on the type of feed that you're using, like I said, but more on how you grow it and how you feed it. It's not the cost of your feed always, it's also the cost of feeding your feed. So the goals of a winter feeding program, obviously, we want to ensure adequate body condition for rebreeding. We want to support fetal growth and calf viability. We want healthy, growthy calves that, don't take a long time to get up. They get their colostrum, and they hit the ground running, and they're healthy, and they have a good mineral status because the cow also had a good mineral status. It also leads to, a good winter feeding program helps with quality colostrum production. Muscle and bone growth for calves, obviously, and achieving our production outcomes and objectives with minimal cost. And can we make use of these nutrients to maximize yield and quality of our forage in the summer? So lowering costs is more than feeding cheaply. It needs to include an integrated systems and management approach. So I like the quote, "You can't starve a profit into a cow." Okay, so feeding cheaply doesn't mean feeding crappy feed and really, really hands off. It takes an integrated approach, and it needs to take into consideration context. The what? Crop selection, very important. So keeping something actively growing in the ground for as much of the year as possible is really important. So we can do things like polycrops, companion crops, perennialization, using biennials. On our farm, we try to use some annual crop for cash flow as a way to renovate rough fields. We've got a lot of Richardson ground squirrels and moles in our area. So sometimes those perennial forage stands just get too rough, and we'll rotate them out with an annual crop. A good way to get ahead of an undesirable grass species, establishing a perennial forage crop, like a nurse crop like barley with your alfalfa, things like that. And then using residue or straw for grazing to try to, extract as much value per acre as you can while making those acres more productive. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is something I kind of tell myself when I think there's kind of a bit of a binary thinking when it comes to things like regenerative ag and whatnot. So I still have to be profitable on the acres that I have. So if that means I have to rotate out my perennial forage once in a while to grow a cash crop and then reestablish perennial forage in my rotation, that doesn't mean I am a terrible producer, or I'm ruining the environment, or I'm letting all this carbon into the atmosphere. It's contextual. And if I'm not profitable on the acres that I'm running, I'm not sustainable because my neighbor's going to buy it, tile drain it, and put in canola. So, this leads into my winter feeding strategies, but, things like perennial cropping, or using annuals, for silage. So we have done polycrop mixes for silage and grazing, and this helps also keeping something growing in the ground for as much of the year as possible. We have very sensitive, blowy, sandy land where we live. So really important to try to add some organic matter to that soil and hold it down because it will blow away. So here's some things that we've done, you know, polycrops for silage. So we'll grow it, take a cut, well, we'll actually lots of times do a fall rye, harvest the fall rye off, like chop it for silage. We'll put in a polycrop, chop that for silage, and then we might graze the regrowth of that polycrop. So that is keeping something growing in the ground actively for as much of the year as possible and holding that soil down and adding some organic matter. A couple of things that influence your forage quality when you're considering your winter feeding. Plant maturity at harvest is the biggest one. It's the most important. So as a plant matures, it's got more cellulose, lignin, hemicellulose, right? So you're getting more biomass production, but as it's aging, you're getting more and more fibrous material that is indigestible, right? So the forage quality is actually decreasing. Crop species, next harvesting and storage, and then environment, soil fertility and variety. So greatest to least importance. What impacts plant maturity at harvest? So your seeding date, seeding rate, soil fertility, plant species, and environmental conditions. What can you control? You can't control environmental conditions. If that was the case, we would not have had a drought for several years here. So you can control your seeding date, your seeding rate, your soil fertility, and your plant species, and then when you harvest. And that's how you lock in the quality that you want. So the day you turn your key on your forage harvester, you lock in forage quality. So in this study, they took 120 pregnant dry cows and they did barley, oats, and triticale. I can't remember if this was swath grazed or not, or if it was green feed. Regardless, it wasn't about that. It was about those being harvested at soft dough versus hard dough. And we always kind of think it should be soft dough when it comes to harvesting for cow feed because it's just more digestible and all these things, and that's great. This study actually showed when you left those plants to go to hard dough, your crude protein was 10.9 on the barley, 9.3 on the oats, and the triticale 9.8. And the animal unit months increased compared to harvesting at soft dough. So you had more biomass production and the cows were still able to utilize those nutrients. You didn't actually lose digestibility because of the plant maturity. So it was a trade-off in that biomass production. So that decreased the carrying cost for a cow per head, the cost per cow per day was a decrease in 40 cents per head when you let that go to hard dough versus harvesting at soft dough. So that's a 10% cost savings, which is hugely significant. So delaying harvest to hard dough can increase your yield and reduce feeding costs, and it has been shown not to affect cow performance. Okay, moving on to the how. You know, we've all seen this. If we did any university or anything like that, Liebig's law of the minimum. The most important nutrient: energy, protein, minerals, vitamins, water. Cows will eat to meet their energy requirement first and foremost. And Juanita covered this pretty comprehensively, so I'm not going to get into it into too much detail, but it's usually the most limiting nutrient in most rations. It's the most expensive to supply in general. So like I said, not the cost of your feed, sometimes it's the cost of feeding your feed. And it's definitely impacted by forage quality. So, you know, your NDF and your ADF, your NDF number in your feed test it impacts your intake, and your ADF kind of is a reflection of the digestibility of that feed. So super important. Better quality your feed is, the higher intake you will have. Juanita covered this, right? Factors affecting beef cow energy requirements: age, body weight, level of production. Are they lactating? Are they a replacement heifer? What stage in production are they at what time of year, right? A cow in peak lactation in January, February has much higher requirements than a beef cow in peak lactation in, you know, May or June, right? So we got to take that into consideration. Body fat stores: a thin cow needs 30 to 40% more than a cow that goes into winter in good shape. So in good shape, meaning, you know, a body condition score of 3, 3.5. And hair and hide thickness also has a huge impact on their energy requirements. That's why Holstein cows have a whole lot of trouble outside. They're thin-hided and they don't have a lot of hair. Cold stress can increase your your dry matter intake 10 to 30%. And that's why Juanita mentioned being very careful and mindful of your degradable intake protein and all of that, because that's when things can lead to impaction. So mature cow, she's going to eat 2.5% of her body weight. Well, 1 3/4 to 2.5% of her body weight in dry matter, less near calving, because as that fetus is growing, it's taking up less room, or taking up more room, I should say, and the rumen has less room for intake. So it's more important to feed her more concentrated feed the closer she is to calving. So your forage dry matters, typical ranges are here. So let's say a 1,500-pound cow eating 2.3% of her body weight is 34.5 pounds of dry matter intake. And if your ration is 65% dry matter, that's going to be 53 pounds of actual feed as fed, right? If your ration is 45% dry matter, so something like a silage, a wetter feed, that's going to be 76 pounds of actual feed as fed. So it's really important to make sure that we're paying attention to as fed versus dry matter intake, and certainly pay attention to that when you're reading a feed test, interpreting those results as well. Okay, now into the nitty gritty, feeding options. So winter feeding options, once you've taken all those things into consideration. I said this already, it's not necessarily the cost of your feed, it is the cost of feeding your feed that often has the largest impact in your cost, because it is a huge overhead. So labor, and infrastructure and iron that you need are all overheads that contribute to this. So swath grazing and standing corn grazing, these are some methods that people use on their operations. We use it extensively. This is a drone shot of some of our cows out on some swath grazing. Benefits to swath grazing or corn grazing, it allows the cows to be the harvesting mechanism, right? So no machinery required after you have swathed it. It allows you to lock in that sweet spot. Swath grazing in particular, standing corn grazing is different. So with swath grazing, you can lock in that sweet spot like I talked about between quality and quantity, right? So you've got yield and you've got your quality dropping as that yield increases. You want to find that sweet spot, and when you cut it, you lock it in. It saves on baling, transport, feeding, equipment, and manure removal from a dry lot pen. And with there's been swath grazing research that indicates that swath grazing your crops can reduce total daily feeding costs by 41 to 48%, and that is significant. And of course, this is due more to the 78% reduction in the yardage costs of not having them in the dry lot and feeding that feed, as opposed to the actual 25% reduction in the actual cost of the feed. So that's why I say it's not always the cost of your feed, it's the cost of feeding that feed, which really contributes to your overheads and your overall cost. Management considerations to consider when employing these practices. So naive cows and cow age. There have been times when we have put heifers, years ago, I remember this, I'll never forget. We put some heifers out onto corn grazing, standing corn, and they stood there bawling at the gate for 2 days because they did not know they were standing in food, right? So really important to have an acclimation period where you can monitor them. And it's a learned behavior, right? Adaptation period, 2 to 3 days. Trying not to, I don't like to give them access to entire field of corn grazing, because they can get some acidosis issues because they turn into little combines once they know what's in that feed. Make sure the rumens are full when they enter, and consider the stage of crop and the size of the crop. Wind breaks are essential. Cows can take a lot of cold, but wind can really do them in. So that can really, really significantly up their energy intake or requirements, excuse me. If you can provide wind breaks, natural shelter, super, super important. Access to fresh water, also important. You can certainly use snow, not for lactating cows, not for freshly weaned calves. They just can't eat enough of it to meet their water requirements. And really important to take into consideration, the type of snow. Is it sugary and dry? Is it low moisture? or is it good, that squeaky good wet snow that actually has some moisture in it? And then have a contingency plan. If you don't have an alternate watering source, and I don't know about your place, but my place is still brown. There is no snow to be had. So have a contingency plan for supplying water. Thinking outside the box. So this is something we have started on our farm. We learned this from Pat Waller. I like silage because it's a homogeneous feed. It's really high quality. I can put up a high volume of really good feed on a low amount of acres. Silage is very expensive to feed, right? You need a mixer wagon. You need to start your tractor every day. Fuel's expensive. The labor is expensive. So what we have started doing is piling a silage pile and feeding it extensively, and we'll pile it low and run a electric fence across the face of it. And it's essentially a moving bunk. So every day we just go in and push those posts in a little further and roll the plastic back, and away you go. This is done adjacent to some bale grazing. And that helps spread the cattle out across the field. So things to consider is it doesn't freeze under this pile generally. So you don't want this in muddy ground. I've wondered if about the possibility of packing it on maybe a rig matting. I think that might be a cool idea. The pile is low, like it's maybe 6 feet high, maybe. And so if it's too high moisture, it can freeze. You don't want to do that. And if it's too low moisture, it won't pack, and then you'll have quite a bit of mold because the mold will be able to infiltrate into the pile quite far. So, find that sweet spot in moisture where you can pack it, but not so wet that it'll freeze. We try to face it long ways east-west. So it's the pile, or the other way around. We'd like to have the face of the pile facing south. So it's the sun on it and it's not frozen. Just things to consider. Here's a slide from Ben Ham. He compared his corn grazing to corn pile grazing, and he found a reduction in, I have to move my thing here because I don't know it off the top of my head. That's funny. So his cost per cow per day on his corn grazing was $1.29. His cost per cow per day on corn pile grazing was 97 cents. That is a significant savings. And that's largely due to the utilization, right? So they're not going to be using all of the corn out on the field if you let them graze it. The quality is less and less because you've left it standing. And then also you're able to use fewer acres to grow more silage. And then so that utilization rate and then the higher quality kind of offsets. That's why there's such an offset in cost. My slides aren't advancing. There we go. Feed testing, really important. I'm not going to get too into this because I'm running out of time. But super, super important. Juanita talked about this. You can't manage what you don't measure. So really important to take a feed test. And you can't tell what's in a forage just by looking at it. So feed testing is such a wonderful way to, it's a preventative it's insurance, you have inventory management. That way you're not feeding your highest quality feed when your cow's needs are the lowest. I want to save that feed for when they're, in their last bit of their third trimester or in their third trimester and peak lactation. I don't want to use my good quality feed when the calves are just weaned and the cows are dry and they should be, on their lowest feed requirements, right? And it's a good way for reactive troubleshooting if you're having issues. You can't manage what you don't measure. So very, very important to get your feed tested. Every year can have different challenges. Some are visible, some aren't when it comes to your feeds. So drought, early frost, moisture can cause different issues. So drought and frost, nitrates, prussic acid, wet conditions, field molds, mycotoxins, sulfur in brassicas and polycrop blends is an issue. And then sometimes you can have issues with your tetany ratio and your cal-phos ratio. So really, really important to check what's in your feed. Prevent problems before they start. Adequate nutrition. So matching your available nutrients to your requirements of your different feeding groups. Really, really important. So site selection, really important. Strategic feeding considerations. Why would I choose extensive winter feeding? It's cheaper. I can redistribute nutrients around my farm, and I can import nutrients to my farm, right? So I can have some blowy sensitive land that needs some fertility, and I can choose that as my winter feeding site because my cows are going to be, cycling nutrients on that land, and I'm going to leave some litter, and that's going to help with my water filtration and my effective rainfall the following year. So just things to consider though, we want to make sure that if we're feeding near a sensitive water body, or if we have a very poor soil type, or certain types of topography, we want to make sure we're considering that. Weed importation could be an issue if you are bringing in bales to your farm to do bale grazing or something, an extensive winter feeding strategy, and compaction of wet soil can be an issue. So I get a lot of, oh, what about the waste? And yeah, they're not going to eat it all if you're especially doing something like bale grazing. But it is inorganic fertilizer. So this is from, I think, the Sask Ministry of Agriculture. Yeah, if you scan this QR code, this is a cool tool that will actually, give you the value of your nutrients in your feed priced by the current price of fertilizer. So that's kind of cool. These are numbers from August, so I don't know how up to date they are. But it's showing you that it's, the equivalent of 100 pounds of nitrogen application. Your break even would be 3.5 cents a pound standing hay, or $1.70 per head grazing. Winter feeding and nutrients. So a 1,400 pound bale hay is gonna have about 30 pounds of nitrogen, 6 pounds of phos, 24 pounds of potassium, 3 pounds of sulfur. So 10% of nitrogen consumed is retained. The rest is lost in the urine of the cows, and 20% of phos that's consumed is retained. The rest is lost in manure. Okay. So in-field feeding has a higher nutrient retention versus hauling manure out of dry lot pens. And that's largely because when you pile manure, there's a lot lost to volatilization. And so perennials and livestock integration, based on a meta-analysis, they're seeing that there looks to be a correlation between that, and it might be necessary to increase soil organic matter in cropping systems. So that's a good news story for cattle and perennial crops. So here you can see the difference in forage yield after different manure application, right? So here's a number C here. It's just spread composted, spread raw. But so spread composted is what lots of people do. If you feed in the dry lot, you pile it up, you let it sit for your few months, and then you take it and spread it, right? So this is the yield after doing that. But look at the yield after bale grazing on that same. The yield is increased with bale grazing, and the yield's really increased here with bale processing as well. Now you have to consider bale processing is an added cost. So here's your residue organic fertilizer. Here's a picture of how much residue was left behind on one of our bale grazing sites. And this on the right is the same site the following year. We didn't harrow that. There was a lot of crappy hay. Those were our mature cows, and they cleaned it up pretty good. Even with that level of litter, we didn't have to harrow. We had some good regrowth the next year. Strategic feeding. I'm going to go really quick here. I like the saying cows have a bale processor on the front and a manure spreader on the back. So you got to consider your overheads. Here's some more images of how much residue gets left behind on some of our sites. So that looks pretty drastic, but here is the result the following year. There's a spot you can see where a bale was fed, and it's not choking it out. It is adding fertility in it, and it's increasing the effective rainfall. So, really important if you're doing extensive winter feeding, have a backup plan. You've got to monitor that feed for accessibility. So this picture is showing, a swath after a major ice storm. The cows cannot eat that. And, that's fluky, and it sucks, but it can happen. Extra supplementation, really important to balance and manage those micro minerals and macro as well, just in case you don't want to have wrecks with tetany or anything like that. Feed test. Have an acclimation period for your cows, especially if they're not used to this type of extensive winter feeding. If they're kind of used to the good life and having feed in front of them all the time, it can be a bit of jarring for them to go out and work a little bit more for a living, but they definitely can get used to it, and they can be taught. Start small, look for opportunities, talk to other people, bounce ideas around, and you cannot starve a profit into a cow. This doesn't mean low management, it just means lower overheads. Millions of ways to feed a cow. What opportunities do you have on your own operation? And if you have any questions, let me know. I kind of flew through that. So
Thanks, Melissa. You did cover a lot of material. I liked your comment there that a cow is a feed processor and a manure spreader all in one.
Yeah, that's right.
But I always say too, a cow has 4 stomachs, so why do we have to process the feed for her when the stomachs will do it in a quite efficient manner as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I was involved with MBFI extended grazing project there for a number of years, and we found the grazing of the forage fields, the second cut, third cut in the fall was one of the cheapest methods of extended grazing, close to $1 a day. Your stubble grazing is another cheaper method, and corn was next, coming in at $1.89 over 5 years. So there are other ways of feeding our livestock, and you're right. It's the feeding method that often contributes a lion's share to that cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pam, did we have anything for Melissa?
There are no questions at the moment.
I was either
All right.
abundantly clear or insanely confusing, and people have given up all hope. So
It takes time to digest everything that's discovered. But thank you, Melissa. And so our final topic for today's webinar is livestock and forage programs, looking at the Resilient Ag Landscape Program, or RALP for short, as well as Sustainable Agriculture Manitoba, or SAM. This is all part of the Sustainable Canadian Ag Partnership, which is a new federal provincial initiative that is available to farmers. So we have Colleen Wilson, who is a land management specialist with Manitoba Agriculture. I'd like to welcome Colleen.
Thanks, Sean. So as Sean mentioned, I'm a land management specialist. My focus area is ecological goods and services, and I'm the technical lead for the BGNS programs, so the Resilient Agricultural Landscape programs. I'll be discussing 3 of the environmental programs that are available. Just starting with foundation, we are in a new agreement now in year 1 of the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Every 5 years, we have a new funding agreement with the federal government, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So they partner with the province, and we work together to offer programs that serve to strengthen the ag and agri-food sectors. The red website there is the link to the homepage where all of the programs are offered. I'm going to aim to have a bit of a walkthrough of the website after I make it through these few slides, just to show you where to find all of the information, including application forms. So the 3 programs that we have that have some livestock and forage programming offered are the Resilient Agricultural Landscape Program kind of sub-programs. So there's 2 of them: watershed resilience, which is more for watershed districts, and then carbon sequestration and grassland resilience, which has a broader list of eligible applicants. We also have our general BMP program, Sustainable Agriculture Manitoba. So the first one that I mentioned, watershed resilience, this one, it is the watershed districts that are applying for funding to essentially offer a mini program to landowners on agricultural land within their district boundaries. So all of the BMPs that they could choose to apply for would be linked to their local integrated watershed management plan. So what would be of interest to one watershed district might not work in another district, just depending on their regional issues, targets, goals, identified action items. So again, they do work with those farmers. The farmers themselves will require an environmental farm plan. And we really do urge landowners to check with their local watershed district for available programming, because there are quite a few. They have local, like provincial grants for their watershed district funds. There's Grow and Conservation Trust. Some of them have ALICE programs running. There's the Prairie Climate Watershed Program. So there's quite a bit of funding, and the types of BMPs they're offering can vary across the landscape through the different districts. Through this program that we're funding for RALP, it has to do with water retention projects, wetland restoration, riparians, grassland, grazing management projects, agroforestry, and natural upland areas. For the second sub-program under RALP, it's a little bit more focused on carbon sequestration. So we are looking essentially at grass and trees. So there's agroforestry BMPs and grazing and grassland management. The eligible applicants are also broader. We are offering it to primary producers, Indigenous primary producers and communities, the Association of Manitoba Community Pastures, as well as Egg Crown Land Forage leaseholders. We have a competitive application process, so we're funding the projects that we anticipate bringing the most environmental benefits to the land for the budget that we have available. For this particular program and these two BMPs, government offers a 75% cost share. Government will pay the 75%, and there's a $15,000 cap per project. You can have, as a producer, multiple projects with the $15,000 cap on each of those projects. So if you have 3 different pastures that you're interested in implementing this type of project on, that is just fine. Again, environmental farm plan is required to participate. For Sustainable Agriculture Manitoba, there's a broad list of BMPs here. The eligible applicants are different again. This is offered to primary producers, commercial manure applicators, and custom pesticide operators. There's quite a variety of cost shares and caps depending on the type of BMP. We have 3 different sort of themes that the funding is offered under. There's cropland management, manure and livestock management, and then water management. And I've just made a note to remind myself here to highlight water supply. So this is an opportunity to put in a water source development project, a well or a dugout, where there's no broader sort of grazing management plan going on. The previous RALP program, the carbon sequestration one, water supply is also offered through that one, but it would need to have other components to the BMP being included, cross fencing or grazing management plan or something. The environmental farm plan, I mentioned it a few times. This is a self-assessment that producers can go through in order to identify any areas of environmental risk and then develop a mitigation plan in order to reduce any environmental risk as a result of inherent risk, slope, soil texture, or even your own management practices. It is now available online. It's quite a straightforward process. Seems to be quite popular with producers that have gone through. There's quite a short turnaround time as well. There is an independent third-party reviewer that looks at the environmental farm plans that have been completed. They are hired by Keystone Egg producers. Government does not see any private information that is going through the environmental farm plan. The statement of completion is also issued through this online database. With that, I'll just highlight a few places to keep track of the news and announcements coming about different programming. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You can follow us on Twitter or X. That's where they announce quite a few programs as well. I'm going to walk us through the SCAP website. There's a phone number and website or email address as well to follow up about programming. Okay, so just skipping over, this is the homepage for Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. I had it at the beginning of the presentation, but ultimately just the government/SCAP. The index was a bonus. So some background information about the 5-year agreement and the funding that's taking place. There are these 6 different priority areas. All the programs I highlighted are under number 1, climate change and environment, but I'll just walk us down. There's also market development and trade, building sector capacity, science research and innovation, resiliency and public trust, as well as Indigenous agriculture and relationship development. So you can expand the area you're interested in, and then it's going to go through the 4 different programs. So the one I didn't highlight before was agro-processing, nothing there for forage and livestock. The Resilient Agricultural Landscape Program for watershed resilience. This one is for watershed districts. They have an open application right now. Their deadline is next week. Resilient Agricultural Landscape Program for carbon sequestration, so the grass and trees. We haven't opened it up for year 2 yet, but you can continue to check back on the website or follow those other social media sources. And again, there's Sam. So I will open up this one, the most relevant one at the moment. So there will be some background information on the program, the eligible applicants. It says BMP specific. The only difference is agroforestry. We won't be planting trees on egg crown land. Otherwise, the eligible applicants are the same between the two BMPs. The eligible expenses are listed by BMP. So you can get into the two BMPs here. I'm going to choose grasslands and grazing management. And again, there will be some background information there. This is where you can check back about when the application intake period is open. It will be updated here. Also reminds you where you can sign up for the newsletter and follow on X or Twitter. There's a summary of eligible activities, but it is much more thorough in the program guides. We'll open that just momentarily. I'll mention the project timeline. We've been piloting an 18-month period, so hopefully having 2 field seasons makes it a bit easier to be able to complete the project. As anticipated, you know, weather can be an issue. Sometimes COVID was an issue, labor was an issue. So 18 months hopefully can get most of the projects through in the anticipated timeline. So the program guide, this is also where the application form will appear once we are open for application intake. So the program guide does have additional information in it. So you can kind of go through the different eligibility cost shares, details about the funds. I'm going to skip down to the grazing one, so we'll pass over trees. Okay, so eligible activities are outlined here. And then it gets into a longer list of eligible expenses. So it's kind of some of the fine print of things that we would like considered in an application, different things that aren't eligible, you know, pump houses, things like that. There are some notes as well. We wouldn't want to see native prairie renovated for this type of project. Cross fencing native prairie would be fine. Just additional details to consider. Wells need to be drilled by a licensed well driller, should be located at least 100 meters away from confined livestock areas. So some helpful information to consider as you're going through. And with that, I will wrap it up. I know we are over our timeline already. So back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Colleen. I guess just was looking, has there been very many of the online EFPs completed to date? Are producers finding it relatively easy?
No, people are finding it relatively easy. I don't have the stats. You know, I think they're about 30 feet away from me, so I could grab something if you're really interested. Yeah, but it is pretty easy. We've had a lot of feedback. I know we just had a group actually go through with several different people all kind of linked, and there were no hiccups with that either. So it was able to accommodate some differences as opposed to just producers going through one at a time. And yeah, we've had positive responses in terms of how quickly the turnaround time has been. And as long as you have your own personal farm information on hand, it's a pretty quick and easy process.
And do we have an idea when the next intakes might be for Sam or any of them, or best guess, or you don't want to?
I can tell you what historically we try to do. We like to have fall and winter intakes so that we can have approvals notice out to producers for the field season. So nothing has been announced yet for the carbon sequestration and grassland resilience or SAM for year 2, but I would suggest keeping your ear to the ground, read those newsletters, follow us on social media, and you can check back on the homepage for the programs as well.
Okay, thanks. Pam, not sure if you have anything for Colleen?
Colleen, I just wanted to maybe ask a question with regards to those who haven't done an environmental farm plan before and just like they can still apply for the programming even though it's not complete. Is that correct?
That has been how it's been handled so far. Yes, they have been able to apply to the program and then get their environmental farm plan completed so that it is available to go in when they submit their claims. I would continue to read the relevant program materials just to make sure that that is still accurate at any time they're applying.
Great, thanks.
Hey, thanks, Colleen. Thank you to all our speakers today. Just want to show you a couple more slides. Our next Stock Talk is January 12th, and we will be reviewing or going over the Beef and Forage Conference highlights. Then we have one in February, March, and April with a variety of beef and forage topics for producers. We already mentioned the livestock and forage specialists across the province that can help you with your rations or feeds or forages, grazing plans, government programs, and more. So feel free to contact any one of them. We have 10 MASC offices across the province. So for all of your lending or insurance needs, and then for any beef or forage information or crop production or farm management, check out Manitoba Agriculture's website as well. The latest costs of production are online on the website. So that concludes today's Stock Talk. Thank you for joining, and I hope you will join us next time on January the 12th, or hope to see you at next week's Beef and Forage Conference in Brandon, or at one of the Beef and Forage event days in January. So thank you, and have a good rest of your day.